Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Brian and Jim here with DrinkABeerandPlayAGame, and today we are checking out Puppeteer for the PS3.
Yes, perhaps the most obscure of the games that we are giving each other this season of giving in December, but does it mean that it deserves to be so forgotten, or is it just another hidden gem? Huh, Bri?
Or is it just Jim got it really cheap and decided he wanted to finally play it?
Hidden. Gem. Metal Jesus. Let's get into it. Released in 2013, this was developed by Sony's SCE Japan Studio Division and was published by Sony. It is a PlayStation 3 exclusive and is a extremely late title, as the PlayStation 4 was right around the bend, so no wonder anyone really didn't hear about this game. I'll let Brian take care of the story of this, but basically you play as a living puppet called Kutaro with some magical scissors and some all kinds of craziness. Let's just get into it. The graphics. This is, by far, even more so than the cel-shaded era of the early 6th gen, one of the most unique looking games you'll ever see. This truly is a living puppet show. The puppet scenery just pops in and pops out of the screen. Everything almost looks like wooden or 3D, like cardboard cutouts almost brought to life. It's such a unique style that I can't help but just call timeless. Like, I'm just predicting right now, like, you can go down the line and this game will still look good, kind of like Wind Waker does, in the fact that it's just such a unique system that just perfectly works. And the lighting in this game is just insane. You can have these dark, super brooding moments with, the moon bear, or these just bright, delightful, happy forest scenes. Like, you just run the gamut of all these different emotions through the visuals in this game. It's really impressive what they've done here. And the fact that, especially in some of the later boss fights, there's so much going on screen at once, and you don't even really have any kind of slowdown, which also goes towards the gameplay, but the game just just runs so well while just keeping its luck. I will admit, there's a lot of Little Big Planet vibes to it, but it takes kind of the foundation of that kind of cuteness with Sackboy and, having different faces and changing and stuff like that, but just applies it so well in its own unique way, so we just had to give it 10s. And you don't need any beers. It's truly a sight to behold. The sound. This, again, is a really unique package. So the first thing I want to talk about is probably the music, because it's not the most memorable soundtrack in the world, but it's perfectly applicable to the story, and it just sounds like what a marionette show or even a live play would sound like in real life. Like, it's hard to describe, but those sounds that, like, those creative stagehands can do to make the imitations of thunder sounds or different sounds in the background, it's almost like they took something straight from a play and applied it to the video game. The music in the game is really good. It's orchestral based in a lot of stances, but you have, again, just like the graphics, the dark brooding or the very light and happy. It very much fits the mood of the levels that you're in. Nothing's particularly memorable, I'll say that, but it's perfect background noise. The sound effects, like we said, they're fine, and one of the real stars of this is the voice acting. The biggest problem with the voice acting is there's way too much of it. Some of these cutscenes just go on so long, and I'm talking 10, 15 minutes sometimes. Like, it's just insane, but it's really well done. All the voice actors are very memorable, and you'll remember these performances for a while after playing this game. So, while some of it's very unmemorable, for the most part, you won't be forgetting the time you spent with it, so we had to give it 8s. And when it comes to beer, we're just going to add 1 beer for way too much voice acting.
The control. At its core, this game is just a basic platformer with some additional power-ups as you play through the game. Towards the end of the game, you will have a power-up for every single button on the PS3. And it can get a bit confusing, but honestly, this game does a really good job of warming you up to the idea of how you have to use your buttons. Although, like I said, towards the final stages, when you have to combine all of them, it will get a bit confusing. The inputs are absolutely fine. The actual running and jumping are very clear cut. There's not a momentum system like you would see in Mario or any of those other games. Here's my number one problem with the control itself, is that too many times you rely on rapidly pressing a button, because as you're using these scissors to cut through areas, you sometimes have to press it really fast. Admittedly, I probably pressed it a little bit too much, but man, some of these boss fights and some of these stages where you need to follow a specific pattern, my thumb was killing me. Not to mention, one of our biggest pet peeves, a lot of the boss fights, actually, come to think of it, every boss fight ends with quick time events. They're fine, they're easy, but I just don't like it from a control standpoint, because you spend all this time fine-tuning your player and then you just whittle it down to pressing a button at the right time. So while there's no specific real issues I have with the control, it can just become a bit tiresome as you play through. So when it comes to scores, I gave it a 7, Jim gave it an 8. It's definitely not perfect, but it's well above average, and it's nothing that's going to stop you from enjoying yourself. So when it comes to beer, I'm going to add 2, just because your thumb is going to be killing you, and maybe that will help numb the pain as you play through this game. The gameplay. Well, I usually give Jim shit for being way too long-winded with this section, but let me just try to sum up the actual story before I get into the actual gameplay mechanics. As Jim said, you're an animated puppet named Kutaro who essentially has his head devoured by the Moon Bear King because he's stolen the moon from the moon goddess. Using a pair of magical scissors called Calibris, you have to find these moonstone shards to power up enough to be able to defeat the Moon Bear King. So if that's not confusing enough, another element to this game is that you have to fight 12 of the Moon Bear King's generals, which are all based on the Chinese zodiac. So you have that mixed in with a bunch of folklore, and this game just is imaginative as any game you will ever play. So there's basically a story without giving out too many spoilers. What it boils down to is a platformer that really plays on the idea of using these scissors to cut down puppets. You'll have a lot of bosses and a lot of things that go around the idea of using physics, of using scissors to cut through things. Some levels like this have you on a very predetermined path, and you're very speedily cutting through areas where you have to do specific jumps. But I will say, this is a fairly easy platformer. As you go through a level, one of the major components and mechanics of the game is that you have a sidekick. At first, it's just set up as this flying cat, and then eventually it's a sun goddess. But what you can do is investigate all the areas you go through. So you're going to spend a lot of times in areas investigating literally candles, rocks, every area you can to find these moon sparkles. When you collect enough of these, you have an additional life. When I finished this game, I had over 50 lives, because there's not a lot of areas you're going to die in this game unless you really don't know how to play. Jim mentioned you collect various heads throughout the levels, and each head doesn't give you a specific power, but what it does is allows you to unlock specific bonus stages, or makes a boss fight much easier if you do the appropriate dance when the head icon shows up. I know a lot of this is not going to make sense, so you're going to have to try to play the game to understand it. At the end of the day, there's nothing very specific or special this game does, but like Jim said, there's a ton of charm here. Where this game falls down for Jim and I is the dialogue. Every single level approximately takes 20 to 30 minutes to complete, but that's only because you're going to spend 10 to 15 minutes listening to dialogue. You'll usually have an opening act set up like a play, where you'll hear the whole setup of what Kutaro has to do. You'll play about 5 minutes or so, then you'll have another break, then you'll play again, break, rinse, and repeat. It can get very tiresome, especially by the end, because there's 3 levels per stage, and there's 7 different stages. And quite honestly, by the time I was done, I was just happy to be over with it, because the game is very inventive, and I really like the way it plays, but I just wish there wasn't so much goddamn time spent on this dialogue. And the final thing I'll mention is the boss fights. Every level leads up to this really iconic boss fight that looks amazing, but as I said, in Control, you always have to beat the boss with quick time events, which is fine. It might be a little bit of a breather considering how much you went through to get to the boss. I just never like finishing off bosses with quick time events, and that's all you do in this game. So, when it comes to scores, we both gave it 7s. It's definitely above average, but combined with the issues of the dialogue, the repetitive nature of what you have to do in a game, it's definitely not perfect. So, when it comes to beer, I'm going to add 1 because you're going to need to be drinking while you play this game and hearing the dialogue from stage to stage.
Originality I can keep short because there really is a lot of this game that just feels like stuff that you've seen 1,000 times before. But between the aesthetic and the fact that it's all based around using scissors and cutting, it still kind of feels somewhat original overall. It probably isn't, but to us at least, there was something there that we're like, you know what, this is something we haven't seen before. So that's why we gave it 5s. And when it comes to beer, I'll just give it 1 beer for, once again, that amazing aesthetic.
The replayability. Typically, we give games a lot of points when you have multiple endings, which this game technically does not have, but one thing this game has in spades is unlockables, and specifically, when you find bonus stages or specific heads to unlock certain areas, man oh man does every stage have a ton. When I completed the game, I don't even know if I released half of the heads, and I spent a ton of time trying to search them out. But, as you'll learn, you unlock certain powers later in the game that will only allow you to open up certain areas in the original levels. So, there's plenty of reasons to go back, find every single head, find all the moon shards, save all the souls of all the children that the Moon Bear King stole, and you're just going to keep coming back. Sure, once you get through all that, there's not much to do, but still, that and will be enough to keep bringing you back. Not to mention, there is multiplayer in this game, so we had to give it points there. When it comes to scores, we both gave it 6s. We're not giving it an outrageous number of points, but there's plenty of reasons to keep coming back and play this game. So when it comes to beer, I'm not even going to add any. Just the sheer number of unlockables you can have in this game is pretty insane. So overall, we said there's a lot to like about this game, but dear God, the dialogue. Why did it have to go on so long?
Yeah, it really felt like I appreciate the story and the world they were building here. One of the most unique looking games you'll ever see. Love the aesthetic. But my God, they added at least like 3 more hours to it with all the goddamn talking. It was just a bit unnecessary.
Yeah, it's something as soon as I started playing from Jim, I was like, well, Jim, you actually gave me a game with a lot of charm, and it was pretty fun. And I went through and beat the whole thing, and I was like, holy shit. I just wish they would have changed that. That would have made this a substantially better game.
Yeah, like we said, very approachable game, fun for the whole family. It's kind of along the lines of Kirby. Definitely not a hard one for anyone with experience, but even for new players, a good game to start them out with. Nice and colorful, yada yada yada.
Yeah.
So, a great Christmas time game, you could say.
If it's cheap enough.
It's like $15.
That'll do. So, when it comes to scores, we both gave it 7s. It's definitely above average, but because of the things we've talked about, it's just not perfect. And when we combine all of our scores together, it comes out to a 7.4. Like Jim said, this is going to be a game that, because of how it looks and sounds, it will last forever. It just has that kind of timeless, classic style to it. But the dialogue can wear you a little bit thin, and the gameplay can get a bit monotonous by the end. Still, it's one I would highly recommend.
Yeah, definitely one you should play through at least once, and with all that dialogue, you might only want to keep it at once.
So, with that, guys, thanks for watching, and cheers.
Cheers.
When it comes to beer pairing, I decided to go with the Firestone Mocha Merlin. This is a delicious beer with a lot of complex flavors, which matches the imagination of this game to a T. So, go grab yourself a 6-pack, sit back, and enjoy. But remember to drink your beers and play your games responsibly. As always, guys, thanks for checking out this video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you give us a thumbs up, leave some comments, or better yet, why not subscribe? Till next time, guys, cheers.